My name is Rob Longcor. I'm a Stanford MBA student, and I'm going to be presenting today on automation in trucking. Before I dive into trucking automation technology, I'd like to give a brief overview of the industry. Here are some quick industry facts. There are about 3.5 million truck drivers in the US. 350,000 of those are independent owner-operators, and the remainder work for large fleets. This accounts for over 70% of all of the freight tonnage that's moved in the US, and about $730 billion in freight revenues, which accounts for 82% of all freight revenue. Lastly, it's a highly fragmented industry. The top 50 firms own just 30% of the market. Now, when we look at what it actually costs to operate a business in this industry, we can see that driver and fuel make up the vast majority of the operating costs. We can also start to think about which of these buckets might be most affected by automation, in particular the driver, the fuel, and the insurance costs. There are essentially three main areas of technological disruption within the trucking industry: telematics, V2X communications, and driving automation. Telematics is essentially a wireless communications platform that allows a truck to communicate with its fleet operator or some other data hub. V2X communications can be either vehicle-to-vehicle or vehicle-to-infrastructure communication, and that's particularly important in trucking because of the ability of trucks to platoon or to travel together in pairs or in multiple groups. And lastly, there's automation of the actual driving task, which is similar to passenger vehicles using radar, LiDAR, cameras, etc. To actually automate the task of driving. This presentation will focus primarily on driving automation and V2X communications. If you want to learn more about telematics, you can check my memo. So what are the benefits of automated trucks? On the one hand, there are the benefits that come from automated driving in general, and there are some particularities here specific to commercial vehicles that are important. The first is that you can optimize driver rest periods. So in the trucking industry, there are regulations called hours of service requirements that regulate how long a driver can work before he has to take a rest period. If you could automate a portion of that trip and allow the driver to rest and the truck to keep driving at the same time, you could potentially increase productivity. There are fuel efficiency gains from predictive driving. That is, when the truck can anticipate turns in the road or ups and downs in the road and control acceleration and deceleration to save fuel. You can eliminate human error. You can better utilize the vehicle, for example, by keeping it at a constant speed that maximizes fuel efficiency. And of course, you could eventually go driverless and remove the driver from the vehicle entirely. There's also a second additional benefit from automation in trucking in particular, and that is platooning, which I hinted at earlier. So this is a cooperative automated driving scenario where multiple trucks will follow closely behind each other and will use autonomous technology as well as vehicle-to-vehicle communication to be able to reduce the distance between the trucks and improve their aerodynamics. This leads to enhanced fuel consumption. Studies have shown that the fuel economy is improved anywhere from 5 to 10% by doing so. In this space. On the one hand, you have some OEMs that are making big strides. Freightliner is a company that is owned and operated by Daimler, the largest truck manufacturer in the world, and they recently just put out the Freightliner Inspiration, which is an L3 automated production truck. It has a highway pilot mode that allows drivers to drive automate the driving task on interstates and interway exchanges. They released this in 2015 in a dramatic fashion by driving one of these trucks over the Hoover Dam without a driver at the wheel. This technology has also been implemented in Germany, where a small fleet of Mercedes trucks has been driving on the Autobahn since 2015. The other major innovator in this space is a San Francisco-based startup called Otto. Otto retrofits existing Volvo trucks with automation technology such as radar, LiDAR, cameras, and other sensors that enable these trucks to be capable of L4 automation. They currently have 6 trucks that are being tested on the California 101 highway, and they recently completed the first autonomous truck delivery in cooperation with Anheuser-Busch. Areas of disruption potential within this space, I want to highlight 3 here specifically. The first is safety. In the short term, safety will likely be the most significant driver of adoption for automation technology. 90% of truck accidents are caused by human error. So By introducing this technology, you can potentially significantly reduce the number of accidents that are caused by human error. The second is hours of service requirements. I hinted at this earlier, but this is essentially a regulatory requirement that forces drivers to take rest periods after working for a certain amount of time. If you have automation technology that allows the driver to sleep or to rest while the truck is still driving, you can enhance productivity significantly. And the last ones are driver shortage and driver retention, which are a related problem. Essentially, this industry has been struggling from a long-term chronic shortage of drivers. And so if you could introduce some automation technology that on the one hand makes driving more pleasant and enjoyable because you can rest for longer periods of time, but on the other hand has the potential also to reduce the demand for truck drivers, it could really provide a solution to this potential issue. Based on what I've read, the adoption of this technology in trucks will be driven by three main factors really. So safety was the big one I mentioned earlier, but the other two are the level of automation that we're talking about and the type of trucking. So in terms of the level of automation, for L1 and L2 automation, these allow you to achieve a high level of fuel savings from platooning, because you'll still need a human driver to be at the wheel. But if you can use the technology as well as vehicle-to-vehicle communication to put several trucks in a row, allow them to achieve that 5 to 10% savings, there's significant potential there. And then on the higher end of automation, you'll have significant amount of cost savings driven from removing the actual driver from the vehicle itself. If you look at the type of driving you're doing, whether it's long haul, which are trips that are cross country, or regional on roads that have little or no traffic, it looks a little bit different. So for long haul trucking, where there's lots of highway traffic and you're able to platoon with other trucks fairly easily for long distances, there's going to be significant fuel and driver savings there and a shorter payback period to adopting this technology. But if you're traveling shorter distances on roads where there aren't a lot of other trucks to platoon with, you're not going to find the same advantages. And so, for L1 and L2 automation, we're really talking about savings from platooning. And for L4, L5, the savings are going to come from removing the driver from the actual truck. And so there's this weird inflection point around L3 where, the cost of that technology is higher than L1 or L2, but you're not really seeing any significant improvement in fuel savings or driver costs. So we probably expect the transition from L3 to L4 to happen very quickly. So what is the impact on truck drivers? I mentioned before that there is a chronic driver shortage in this country. The shortage was 50,000 drivers in 2016. This is expected to increase to 175,000 in 2024. There is potential for automation to fill some of that gap. In the longer term, however, there is a debate over how automation will impact the job of truck drivers. On the one hand, you have incumbents in the industry that believe that the job of the driver is in no danger in anything but the very long term. I spoke with Chris Spear of the American Trucking Associations, and he believes that the job of the truck driver will essentially become similar to the job of a pilot that operates an airplane. They're still very important for the takeoff, landing, and taxiing of the airplane, but for the long portion of the flight where it's cruising at high altitudes, it lets the autonomous technology take over. He believes the truck drivers are still required for city driving and for doing pickups and drop-offs. And there are many in the industry that believe the same thing. On the other hand, you have innovators and technologists who believe that the job of a truck driver will have to change substantially or may go away entirely in the long term. There's some debate over how long it will take for that to happen, but most of these people believe that the job of the truck driver is seriously threatened by this type of technology. This includes companies like Otto and even OEMs like Daimler, who are building the Freightliner Inspiration. But without a doubt, there is a lot of media hype about automation and the effect that it will have on the job of the American truck driver. This is, of course, of central importance now to the Trump administration, as a significant part of his platform was built around protecting jobs, particularly American manufacturing and supply chain jobs. Final thoughts and implications. As I mentioned before, the commercial benefits of automation are limited in the short term. Adoption on this time frame will be driven primarily by safety regulations. However, in the medium and longer term, the level of platooning will have a significant impact on payback periods, at least up to L3 automation. This will inherently advantage large fleet operators who are more easily capable of orchestrating platooning, and their drivers will have more flexibility to wait for a platooning partner. As we start to talk about L4 and L5 levels of automation, payback periods will drop significantly due to substantial savings on driver costs. At these levels of automation, platooning becomes relatively less important. We may also expect new business models to emerge around platoon service providers, that are companies that essentially provide logistics platforms that allow fleets to orchestrate platooning, either within their own fleet or across multiple fleets. And finally, important considerations will need to be made for displaced drivers, or the role of drivers will need to change dramatically as we approach L4 and L5 automation. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me.